this was actually a boat built by one of the members of the club many years ago, David Vincent, and he was unable to finish the boat, but we were able to find it through the help of the multi-hull club here and chased it down to an interesting gentleman who had purchased it and took it to Reno, Nevada. And so that's where we picked it up to bring it back to Seattle. And we plopped it on a friend's property in Woodinville, where we were working on it part-time until we sold our house and then moved on to the boat full-time, trying to get it ready so that then we could take the pieces and move it further down the road. So when we got it, it was really just structurally, the main hull was finished. The outer hulls were mostly big canoes. And so we had to do all of the connecting structure and all of the systems, step the mast, you name it, we had to do it. And so Patty and I knew nothing about sailing except for the generous help that we'd gotten people from the club. And so we were kind of figuring out as we go. And thankfully, John Marples was kind enough to send us a complete set of plans, and I was smart enough to not deviate from them. And so everything went together really nicely, pretty amazing. I mean, it was mostly to the credit of the original builder, how great a job he did, and then how clear the plans were that John provided. And so we just kept following the process, and it worked. A couple of quick pictures to show you what the boat looked like when we received it, and then what it looked like once we finished it. And it was a great transformation. Patty gets all the credit for how good the inside looks. I wanted to make sure it floated, but she wanted to make sure that this was going to be our home. And so we wanted to make sure that it looked like our home. So pretty thrilled how well it turned out. It was a lot of work, but it's treated us well. Looking at a foot pump, one of the things that we did do is to try and keep systems that we could keep simple. We kept them simple. So the water system was a 38-gallon water bladder with a couple of foot pumps. So there was fewer things to go wrong there, because we had more complicated electrical system with an induction stove and a toaster oven for the electrical for all of our cooking needs. And I'll get into how we were able to power those things in a minute. You jump in anything more. We did have a shower on the boat as well. I recommend these pump-up shower things, work pretty nice. If you're a bald guy like me and you're a little conservative, you can take a pretty reasonable shower on less than a half a gallon of water. We had refrigeration, had a pretty nice little refrigerator that I built. We even bought a cheap Amazon freezer so we could freeze fish that we caught or people gave us. You built that refrigerator? I did, yeah. Yeah, it worked out great. It actually was a isotherm unit that was water cooled, and it worked great until the water temperature got to 95 degrees, and then it wasn't as happy as it could have been. But for the most part, it worked pretty flawlessly, just sipped power. This is a funky shot, but mostly I just wanted to show that we had 6 pretty good sized solar panels, and that allowed us to have an all electric boat. So we didn't put any propane on the boat. We had a little over 1,000 watts of solar and a 3,000 watt inverter, and that managed to take care of all of our needs. We bought a new 25 horsepower Beta diesel, and that served us well. It really just sips fuel. If we're only going 5 or 6 knots, we're only burning about 1/4 gallon an hour of diesel. So we don't use much. And so it treated us well. Like a lot of us, the cruisers, we do a lot of motor sailing. And so then we're usually less than 1/4 gallon an hour of fuel if we get the sails up as well. Picture of at least a good chunk of the electrical system. A lot of expensive blue boxes on the boat from Victron, but they all talk to each other nicely, and so far they've held up pretty well. No, it's a funny thing. It wasn't intentional, but we realized when we launched the boat that nobody but Patty or myself touched anything on the boat from start to finish. Part of it, I think, was COVID. And so there wasn't anybody around, and we just sort of figured it out. but yeah, it was interesting that we didn't, other than, you know, the help from John Marples, we didn't really get any outside help. So there, I mean, the boatyard, they probably could have helped if we needed it, but we just kept going through the steps and suddenly the boat was done. And so, yeah, I mean, the electrical is always the biggest one, but I mean, yeah.
It's not all of a
Yeah.
sudden it was just done.
But you just kept chipping away. The electrical in particular was one that, I mean, thankfully between YouTube and other things, you can learn a lot, but mostly just read the manufacturer's instructions. That was the biggest thing I've found, is I stopped looking at forums and just read what the manufacturer told me to do, and I never got in any trouble. And so we pretty much ignored everybody else and just did what the manufacturer said to do. And so far it's been good. Somewhat amazingly, nothing over a year of living on it full time, nothing has failed, nothing is broken. And so that's kind of amazing, because we set up all the sail handling systems, electrical, plumbing, auxiliary power, you name it. I mean, we did it, all of it. And so we're happy that it's still working. We're still a bit in the honeymoon period. It's only been a year, but we're enjoying it while we got it.
So when you were working on the boat, you were also living on it. So you probably tested part of it in water.
Yeah, we were able, like for the electrical and things like that, we were able to live with it on land for months. And so we pretty much knew what we had. We knew what our power usage was going to be. And so there weren't any big surprises from that standpoint.
Do you think you get a little more solar?
Most of the time. Yeah. Yeah, we've got 400 amps of lithium batteries, and that served us pretty well. It was a little tiring for it at the end when the poor refrigerator was working hard and we were using more power than we wanted to, but everything always kept up. And so far so good with power. And the weather in Mexico was so good. I mean, we didn't see a cloud for probably 7 months or something. And so it was able to top off the batteries. Typically we could top off the batteries by 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And so we usually had quite a bit of reserve. We would have only needed it if we would have had multiple rainy days or something. We probably would have needed it. And we had an oversized alternator on the diesel engine, so that was sort of our backup generator. If we did get into trouble, we could just turn that on for a short period of time, and that topped off the batteries pretty quickly.
Yeah, I was going to ask, is that something that you always had enabled when you were running the
We
engine?
have, yeah. Towards the end, when it got really hot, we came back and we were pretty motivated. So we bought a small portable air conditioner that on paper, it looks like it's within the energy capabilities that we've got. So we'll see. I don't think we're going to need it that much. But it's nice if we can make it work just for a couple of hours a day. It can make a big difference just to be able to cool it off a little bit at night to sleep. I think that would have helped us out quite a bit. So, but
Cooling the whole boat, or just?
I don't know. I think we would just cool off while we sleep. We don't mind sweating during the day. It's just hard to sleep at night if it's still 90-some degrees and pretty humid. It's as much knocking down the humidity as it is the air temperature too. If we could do both of those things, then we don't need any of it. But it's one of those things, if it's possible, we're going to try it. It's a little bit crazy how much stuff we've stuck on a small trimaran, but it's still, the water line is still reasonable. We're not going to win any races, but that wasn't the plan to begin with. So we're doing all the classic cruiser things that we take some stuff off the boat before we add more, but we never quite take as much off the boat as we add to the boat. And so I think we're in good cruiser company there. So we do not. No, it's just, and it would be challenging to do it. I think it's easier for us to just stay in proper climates.
But the whole cabin is completely enclosed, so we can sail inside the boat. I mean, like completely in covered situation. So that helps a lot for, kind of intermittent weather or whatever. Actually, right before we took the boat out of the water in Guaymas, we had a pretty good squall hit us, and it just dumped and it was lightning and thunder and you name it. It was crazy. And the boat stayed dry. So.
I almost wet myself, but the boat stayed dry. Well, we did, one of the things that I wanted to do was to try and run all of the lines into the cockpit. The hope was that we wouldn't never have to leave the center cockpit unless something went wrong. And so all the reefing lines, all the systems, basically, we were able to run into this fully enclosed cockpit, and that worked well. We didn't have to reef a lot, but we reefed early and often if we thought we would need to, and it was always really easy to do. We do. We have roller furling, and we have a nice slippery track for the main to go up and down, and so that goes up and down. Probably the only time I leave the cockpit is just to raise. We probably could do it from the cockpit, but usually we're just heading out, and so it's a pretty safe time to go out there anyway. So we'll raise the main, and if we drop the main, I'll usually go out and make sure it behaves itself. But otherwise, we don't have to. Yeah, we really don't have to leave the cockpit. It's nice when we're doing overnight passages and I'm sleeping. I'm completely confident that Patty can do anything that needs to happen on the boat and vice versa. So this is looking at the back end of the boat. We do have tiller steering. It's a remote. We have remote connections for the tiller steering to work. I think the next slide might show. I guess it doesn't really show that, but basically we've got cables running back so that we like the idea of the tiller steering. We really didn't have enough room for a wheel in the cockpit. We thought it would get pretty crowded. It's sort of our living room, and so we didn't want to have it in the middle. And so we basically stole the idea from our sister ship Sunbow that's in the area, and it also made it really simple for the autopilot. We just bought one of these heavy-duty tiller pilots, and that served us really well. Easy to put away, easy to swap out parts. If we ever had a problem, we can have a whole another unit sitting in the boat if we're going to do any big passages.
We did a Doyle Code Zero sail though before we left the States as well, before we left, made for the boat, and that ended up being a really great sail. However, we did discover, and it's still in process now, that we're going to make sort of almost like a slip cover for it to pull down over it, almost like our for a spinnaker. Yeah, something similar to that, just to be able to get it under control quickly, because it does furl, but it doesn't stay furled very well. And
It's a bottom furler, a continuous line furler, and it just the shape of the Code Zero. We've been unsuccessful to. It usually starts to unwrap at the top, or at least gets a little bubble up there, and then things get more exciting than we'd like. And so
we almost had it go off the boat at one point.
we've done it. I mean, everybody's done battle with sails. That's the only one we've done any battles with. So we're gonna find ways to tame that, because we just don't like that much excitement. So it's usually that if it's getting too windy to use it, you want to put it away and make sure it's going to stay away and not try and open back up again. So we have a plan for it anyway, and it would allow us to give a little. Then we could leave it up, and we give it much more sun protection if we had a sleeve over it, a little sock, and then we would raise it. We'd raise it, deploy it, reef it, roll it in, and then put the sock back on it, and then we know it's not going to go anywhere. So that's the only thing that gave us any trouble, and that was only occasionally, but that's a lot of sail to be wrestling out there if things get going.
Yeah, things get exciting quickly.
This slide was with us launching the boat in Napa, and then and this is our little catamaran style dinghy that has served us well. And so now we get on to the good stuff. I sort of broke this into 3 different sections, but going from San Francisco down to Ensenada, I didn't have a lot of slides just because we have so many slides that I didn't want this thing to drag out too long. So we're going to make some pretty big jumps basically from San Francisco. And we saw a lot of great things. That part of the coast is really great with Morro Bay and Monterey Bay. Yeah, a lot of interesting stuff along the way. But everybody's got to take the classic going underneath the San Francisco Bridge shot. It was a pretty nice day. It didn't beat us up too much getting out, which was good enough that it's a rare setting to have Patty out of the cockpit when we're at that latitude, but she was out that day. I don't think that one is, which is kind of amazing. It was probably pretty short-lived. Doesn't look like there's a lot of wind. So once the wind picked up, I'm sure we all ducked back into the cockpit. So I sort of skipped everything until we got to Santa Barbara, which it is amazing. Anybody that's gone down there, once you come around the corner and get into Santa Barbara Channel, you know you're suddenly in a different body of water. Everything feels different. The color of the water is different. We got around Point Conception without too much difficulty. They typically say to try and go around in the middle of the night because the wind settles down, and it sort of settled down. It was okay. By that time, we'd spent enough time in a little bit of wind that it was pretty comfortable getting around the corner, and then things chilled out in a hurry, and we settled into Santa Barbara. For Patty and I, we really never spent any time in kind of Central or Southern California, and we really enjoyed it in a hurry. They sort of had to kick us out of the marina because we weren't in any hurry to leave. That was always the goal, was to get that far south and then figure it out. So we had a great time down there. But we did continue on after a couple of weeks, doing all the normal classic Southern California beach stops along the way. And so we stopped a few times and did the touristy stuff, renting bikes and doing the boardwalk things and watching the surfers do their thing. But all the while, just kind of working our way south. We did spend some time out on the islands. I don't think I have any pictures of Santa Cruz Island, but we were out there for a while. We did spend a fair amount of time though at Catalina Island, and that is a pretty special place. I mean, it's pretty busy and touristy, but it's still a pretty amazing body of water island that's only just a few miles off the coast of LA. So we spent a week in two harbors, which is a little bit more laid back. Patty did a little bit of fishing, and we learned all about mooring balls, which was an interesting thing. Thankfully, I think they could see the fear in our eyes. And so the people that were setting us up, they set us as far away from everybody else that they could. We were out where the big boats were at, not that we needed that much space, but there were fewer things to run into. And the people there are super nice. These guys are out there in their little power boats, and they can push and pull you around wherever you need to be. Because if we were in a catamaran with two engines, we could maneuver pretty well. But this thing, if it started going the way it didn't want to go with just a simple rudder and one engine, they were ready to help if we needed it. Then we ended up working our way down to Avalon, that one was, thankfully we'd already practiced with the moorings at the quieter end of the island, because this end of the island was a little bit busier. But it turned out that the guy that was out helping people that day, he actually had been following us on Instagram. He's got a trimaran in Mexico. And so he was excited to see us, and he knew exactly what we were up against. So he got us tucked into our little spot. And once you're tucked in and attached to a mooring ball front and back, you feel pretty secure. So then you can go in and go out and play on the island pretty comfortably. You know it's going to be there when you get back. Stern tide as well, yeah. They're packed in so tight they can't afford the boats to wander around at all. And so once you get stern tide, then everybody's pointing into the winds and behaving themselves. We haven't talked about, this isn't the first time, but Patty's, one of the great things about the boat is Patty's a long time aerialist, and she could still do her aerials on the boat. And so this was playing around in Catalina Island. And then once we finally finished up there, it's so difficult. We've got some dolphin videos, but those don't work very well on Zoom. So I had a couple of still shots, but playing with the dolphins doesn't get old. Everybody says it doesn't, but Patty's up there talking to them.
And they talk back. They do. They make their little noises and stuff. They'll like actually look at you and they'll be talking. It's really interesting. Yeah, they're very social.
Fun to have them around when they show up. Everything gets a lot more exciting on the boat. And no matter what the weather is, Patty's going to be out there on the bow of the boat. She comes out of the cockpit if they're out there. It's not an issue once we get to Mexico, but on the way down the coast, it was still a little chilly at times. So we kind of jumped quickly, but we wanted to get down to Ensenada. We got down there early. We'd never been to Mexico before, and so we want to kind of get settled in Ensenada. It's a simple, nice marina down there. It's sort of Mexico light, because there's so many tourists and things that it gave us a chance to kind of get settled in and figure out what was different. And so we were down there for about yeah, 6 weeks waiting for the hurricane season to end and some of our friends to catch up with us so we could start heading south in November. And we had a great time. We met some other nice friends that were doing the same thing. They had a little sailboat regatta and a nice party. We were on a friend's little monohull and there was no wind, but it was still a lot of fun. There was more beer drinking than sailing, but that was okay. And it was fun. I mean, they know how to party down in Mexico. It's so nice. And I mean, this is Halloween, but
Well, yeah, there are more tastes.
it was,
Day of the Dead.
but on the weekends, they close down the streets and the families all come out and have a great time. And so we had a really great time there. But once November got here and all the other boats caught up with us, then it was time to head south. We sort of followed behind, I guess, the Baja. And so we let that large group of boats get in front of us. And we weren't in a hurry to get down. We stopped at a few more places than they did. And so they were pretty far out in front of us by the time we got around the corner to Cabo. But one of the big milestones is to get to Turtle Bay, which is just a small little bay, but you're sort of getting into different waters once you get that far south. And the water feels different. The air feels different. The air doesn't feel cold when you're out on deck sailing after that. And so that was a nice place to get to. And then after that, everything just starts to get easier. The sea conditions and the wind gets a little more stable. You're out of most of the bigger wave action. It really feels like you're getting pretty far south and the water color just keeps changing, getting bluer and bluer. We've got a clear cover over our centerboard trunk and you would look down there and the water would look so amazing turquoise blue that we knew we were not in Seattle anymore. But we did manage to get around the corner to Cabo San Lucas, and that's a great milestone. The water down there suddenly was 80 degrees. I still remember that we dinghied up on the beach and we all just stood there ankle deep in the water. We're just, wow, the water's warm for the first time. And Cabo San Lucas is a terrible anchorage because there's so much touristy stuff going on. It's just nonstop jet skis and chaos and noise until 3 o'clock in the morning. But it's a nice milestone for a sailor to get there. And there is actually some interesting things to see beyond having, 3 cruise ships in at the same time, which is kind of amazing just to watch those guys come in and out. But there are some really beautiful beaches nearby. And if you get there before all the tourist boats get there, you can almost have the beach to yourself. And so this was early December, I guess, mid-December. And it was, yeah. And Patty was having fun on the beach.
Labyrinth.
Did you do that, Patty?
Mhm. Nope, it's no.
Got it on the first try. It's pretty good. See, there's definitely a pattern on how to do it, which I didn't understand until it was done. So then the next big part of the journey, I shouldn't talk like I'm an expert, but it seems like that the typical kind of cruising in the Sea of Cortez, you get around the corner and then some people will head north up to La Paz, but it can be pretty challenging because the wind is still coming out of the north in December, pretty strong. And so you really either got to get lucky or you really got to beat into the wind for quite a while. And so we were going to go a little further north, but then we said, that's silly. Let's just get across to the mainland side. That's where you want to spend the winter anyway. And so we were in Cabo for about a week waiting for the weather conditions to be, well, first we were hoping we could go north and then we abandoned that. And then we were waiting for nice conditions to get across the sea. And we did pretty well. I mean, sort of the tack we ended up taking almost always was to try and get out in front of a weather system so that we would catch the wind, but the seas hadn't built up yet. And so particularly going straight across like that, I mean, the wind's on your beam and the boat likes that. But if the wind is picked up for a few days, it's got to be super uncomfortable out there with steep waves right on your beam. And so our first crossing was really nice. We didn't have a lot of wind at first, but the boat was happy and we were going 8 knots and 8 knots of wind. And so I think as the day went on, the wind kept picking up. We dropped the code 0. I think we ended up being double reefed at the end, not because we needed to, but because we were buddy boating with our friends on a catamaran and we were trying to stay at least within radio contact of them. And we just kept going faster and faster. And we was like, we just didn't need to go that fast. We were going to get there before it was even daylight in Mazatlan. And so we just double reefed just so we didn't have to worry about getting beat up. It would give us a fighting chance to sleep. And so we just had a nice overnight passage.
Overnight passages, we'd usually do 6 hours on, 6 hours off. That seemed to work really well for us.
Yeah, they were long passages, but we weren't working that hard. I mean, we were in a fully enclosed cockpit. I felt bad for everybody else who was out in the weather. I mean, then I could see why you would want to have shorter shifts, but we were in t-shirts watching movies on our laptop, you know, and so, I mean, it's just, we weren't real sailors. With the autopilot, we make sure the autopilot was doing its job and we keep an eye on everything. But the workload at night just wasn't that high. And so we found that those longer shifts where we could almost have a normal amount of sleep that was okay. And so for us, that worked out pretty well. We went, what, 6 to 2? What was it? I forget what the shifts were, but we switched at 2 o'clock in the morning and that worked okay for us and got us through quite a few overnight passages. I don't think so. It was pretty constant. I tried to keep engaged. It is.
We have a radar too, though. So if there's anything even close to you, like it'll go off, like you can put the alarm on it so that it'll like within a range of a mile. So anything that was if you're, especially when you're sailing at night, you know, in the dark, you kind of want to know if there's anything kind of an obstruction or anything coming up in your way. So yeah, we could see everything that way and it would go off. Like if anything was, even sometimes when the waves would get really big, sometimes it would go off. Yeah.
It's pretty dark out. You can't see a lot. I mean, it's sort of like sailing in the Northwest. We weren't about hitting logs, but it's more about hitting fish pots and things like that. And we did coming down the California coast, then getting kelp caught in. Kelp was a kind of a big deal from time to time.
Yeah.
And so that wasn't a whole lot you could do about it other than just deal with it when it happened. But we didn't have too many issues with that. We did have the engine we were motor sailing one night and the engine stalled out at 3 o'clock in the morning and we knew what it was. And so I had to, thankfully we had a pole long enough that we could sort of dig everything off the prop enough so that then it was happy again. But we only had issues on a few occasions, nothing ever really scary, just more annoying than anything else. And so
We did run at one point though into a line that was crossing an area and it was like it was attached to.
there was a continuous line going all the way across the street, like 3 miles long. And then like
Yeah.
every few hundred yards, it would have a small line coming off it with something going down. And so I could see these little floats in the distance. And then just before we got to it, I could see that they were all lined up and that was something new for us. And so,
He cut the engine immediately,
Yep.
which was the right thing to do.
but it just ended up getting hung up
It
on a
got
rudder.
Yeah, and then partly because of the forces, because we had enough sail up too, where it was putting too much force. So we had to drop the sail and then he actually ended up having to get in the water to pull it off the rudder.
Kept fighting with it. This is stupid. So I just got in the water and it didn't take any pressure to get it off. I just couldn't quite reach it. And so, but otherwise we did pretty well. I mean, a lot of other people had bigger issues than us. I mean, some people had real issues like, you know, almost ripping the shaft out of their boat, getting things wound up so tight. We have a rope cutter on there. I don't know if that would help, but it's, you know, it's like the Northwest. You just got to get lucky that you don't grab anything too tight. But we did pretty well. But we would try and get out there with the fish pots to get away from the fishermen as quick as we could. But once we got to Mazatlan, we really enjoyed Mazatlan. We had multiple friends that lived there and they kind of show us around. But it's a livable city. It's not a little so much just a tourist town. Looks like a pretty nice place to live. And so we had actually neighbors that we had in Edmonds. They've been living there for a couple of years. So they got to play tour guide for us. And we had a great time. We ended up spending Christmas there, and that was really fun. The old part of town is pretty lively, and everything is lit up. Everybody's having a good time. There's live music in all directions, and so we really enjoyed our time there. And they started to hang out with some of the new wildlife. These guys were all over the marinas and all over town, and they just sort of mind their business, but they're fun to look at. But then after we got through the Christmas holiday, then we wanted to keep moving farther south. I mean, typically you want to just keep heading south for a month or so and get down south of Puerto Vallarta. And so we kept working our way south, and we'll just kind of highlight a few of the more interesting stops along the way. San Blas is an old town, I think established back in the mid 1600s. And so there's still old forts down there that this was an old church that you could tour, and a big fort overlooking the bay. And in town, they had some nice open air markets where you could get something for breakfast. And then in that area, there were a lot of mangroves, and we're kind of getting into crocodile country. And so this one, we actually took a little boat trip up there where they're going past all the crocs and up into some nice areas. And there were a few around. If there was any land, then they were, if there was any bit of beach, there was usually a crocodile sunning himself there. Chacala is a little further south, and it is a tiny little anchorage, but a really cool little tourist town. It's got a beautiful classic beach. We're up on, there's actually an old volcano that we're hiking up overlooking the bay, and it just had a great vibe to it. They would bus people in from the area, but everybody was just having a great time on the beach. Though it was nice and protected. It was small enough that we were typically stern tying just so we could squeeze some more boats in there. But we went to this place twice. We really loved it.
What was the name again?
Chacala.
Chacala. All the pongas coming and going, and it was a nice place. And then further south, we're getting kind of done into Banderas Bay, Puerto Vallarta area. And one of the classic cruiser locations is La Cruz has a big cruiser anchorage and marina there. And all of these tuna the water was so clear you could see these tuna, and they are the Dorado. They are the most vicious carnivore. They were really interesting because all the little fish would hide under the boat, and then you would get packs of these guys. They would just circle the boat, just circle, 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 and then they would strike, and then slowly circle, 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 and strike. Man, they are just amazing predators.
Delicious.
And delicious. And delicious.
We didn't actually catch one, but we had friends that caught some, and they gave us some of the fish.
What we learned was that if you weren't good at fishing, just be nice to other people who are good at fishing. And I just couldn't get that excited about it yet. Maybe somewhere down the road, but some of the other people we're buddy boating with, they were fishing 6 hours a day. And so inevitably they would catch more than they could eat. And so we got a lot of free fish. And if the fisher, we were in a little small area, the fishermen would come up and they would sell us fish at a pretty good price. And so we ate a lot of fish, but we didn't catch many fish, but we ate a lot of fish. Some, not as much as we ate. So
I caught a skipjack, and I caught I forget what the other, it's more of a reef fish of some kind. Anyway, yeah. So I mean, I did catch some stuff.
Patty is determined. We trolled
We trolled a
a
lot.
lot.
Yeah, we got the skipjack when we were trolling.
Yeah. And it's a lazy man's way to fish, because you just throw a couple of lines out there and see if something hits them. But and then as we get further along, spearfishing got to be a big thing, and we weren't into spearfishing, but others were, and so they were catching more than they could eat. So Patty has really mastered making ceviche. We ate ceviche, I don't know, 3-4 days a week most of the time, and we never got tired of it. It's
So good.
so good.
Fresh fish right out of the water. You just make it. Pardon?
It's kind of the same thing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
similar.
just cooking it in lime juice. Yeah, with onions and avocado and all kinds of yummy stuff, tomato. This is actually anchored out in Banderas Bay, and there were so many whales. I mean, it actually, in the one anchorage we were in, we didn't experience it, but there were a lot of female whales with calves that would come right into the anchorage because it was shallow and safe. But they did have a mishap where one of the whales was kind of swimming through and actually got hooked on somebody's anchor chain and dragged their boat around. And so,
Small, it was a smaller,
Yeah.
it was calf.
but they're kind of in and amongst you. The bigger males that are out doing these full body breaches, they're out of ways. So that it's rare that you can catch them on camera, at least with the cameras that we had. But it is pretty impressive to watch those things get out of the water. And so I kind of highlighted an area this is south of Puerto Vallarta, and it's an area where we spent most of the winter between Tenacatita and then working our way down to Barra Navidad. It was just, perfect weather every day. It was 82 degrees and the water temperature was upper 70s and no clouds, not a lot of wind. And so these anchorages, like the one that's kind of at the northern end, there were typically 60 boats in the anchorage. And it was really quite a community. I mean, if anybody's been out cruising, they know about these cruiser nets where every morning at 8:30 or 9 o'clock on a specific VHF channel, somebody gets on the radio and they give the daily weather report and tide report, and then what activities are going on, and if anybody needs anything, if anybody has anything to sell. It's every morning people wake up, get their cup of coffee, and then participate in these cruiser nets, and then you kind of know what's going to happen for the day. So at this anchorage,
And the wildlife reports too.
Yeah.
So if people have seen whales or whatever kind of wildlife might be around, they'll usually report that too.
and in this bay too, there would be whales not too far away. And one of the boats, they were really good at knowing when there were whale songs going on, and they would get on the radio. And if you stuck your ear up against the hull, you could hear them singing. It was
Really cool.
really cool. Yeah.
You could just put your ear right on the hull and you could hear them. It was just really neat.
Did anybody have microphones?
I don't know if they did, but yeah, just sticking your ear against the hull, it was enough. You looked a little ridiculous, but it was sure cool to hear them. But in this anchorage, I mean, they would have bocce ball every day at 3 and yoga, women's yoga twice a week. And there was a little river that came out, and there was a little bit of a consistent wave where the kids could learn how to surf. And so we were there for, I don't know, 3 weeks or something. We had no real particular reason to want to leave, but everybody kept saying, you should go down to Barra. You're this far south, you should go down there. And so finally we convinced ourselves to go down there. But it was just this big, beautiful beach and just calm water and pretty good fishing. There was a small town at the other end of the bay that you'd go down to once a week. There was a nice market on Saturdays, so you go down the other end in your dinghy, load up with groceries, and then come back, and you'd be good to go. And then Kaori, is that what the name of this boat is? This boat, this giant sailboat, it's actually from Seattle. It's a guy that owns a boatyard here in Seattle, big commercial. He owns a bunch. Yeah. Super nice family, nice guy. We had actually seen this boat when we were in San Francisco. They pulled into the same marina that we were at. And then amazingly enough, they pulled into our anchorage in this little anchorage, and he'd come down and he had a bunch, his sons and daughters and stuff come in, and they came by and invited us on a party. And so at 1 o'clock in the morning, we're dancing on the deck of this 150-foot boat, and it was fun. I mean, the engineers showed us all through the engine room. It's a crazy thing to see a sailboat that big. It's funny that you recognize all of the systems, but everything is just scaled up ridiculous. I mean, and everything is hydraulic, but it all works. I don't know how much they really sail the boat, but the amount of money that they put into it was pretty impressive. But you go down in the engine room, and they can make 150 gallons of water an hour. We were happy with making 8 gallons an hour, and everything is scaled to match. But it's funny when you get in these big boats, like a lot of the big super yachts, you know, the thing would be 180 feet long, and then you'd read about it on the internet and it'd say it could sleep 6, you know? Like, okay, but that's the life. So you only have to go 10 miles further south than Tennessee and you get into Bar Navidad, which is just kind of an interesting place. There's a nice marina, but then you can see in the background, it's sort of just a big boat parking lot. It's just a shallow lagoon, and it is shallow. You got to be careful. Boats would get stuck in the mud and people have to go over and help them out. But it's completely protected. It would get a little bit breezy, but there was really not much wave action because it was so completely enclosed. But it was attached to a resort with a beautiful swimming pool and nice restaurants. And so it was an easy place just to kind of hang out for a while. And so we were there for quite a while, had a nice town attached to it where you could get groceries. There was some good hiking that you could go. This one had this amazing staircase system that went around the corner of this big rock. And it was a nice walk. You could look out back over the sea. And the great thing about this, we kept hearing about this thing called the French Baker. And so there's a guy that has a French bakery in town. And every morning at 8:30, he loads up his boat and he starts in the marina and then works his way through the anchorage, dinging a little bell, just like he's an ice cream salesman, and comes to every boat that's interested. And he has a full French bakery in his boat. And so everybody assumes they gained several pounds while he's there, but so that everything was reasonably priced. Super nice guy. It took him a long time to get through because everybody wanted to talk to him and he wanted to talk to everybody. But you could buy wine, you could buy coffee, baguettes, you could pizzas, all the pastries. Patty's gluten intolerant, and so I had to take it for the team and eat a lot. Just because we didn't want to insult the guy. But the French baker is quite a guy, super nice guy, and quite a nice service for the sailing community. But after we spent a couple of months down there, you know, the big question is, when do you start heading north? And so when we got asking other people, and you know, one guy said, well, once it's been too warm to sleep 3 nights in a row, it's time to head back north. But the main thing, I think, is you just wait for the wind to start coming out of the south. We let the wind coming out of the north take us all the way down, and then you start to see systems coming out of the south. And then, you know, it's starting to be it's time to head north. For us and for everybody else, the other thing that sort of drives it is you're gonna have to renew your 6-month visa. And so most people want to work their way back up to Puerto Vallarta, where it was easy to fly back home. There's a good airport there to fly back home. And so we would all start talking to each other about when we're going to start heading north. And one of the amazing little places that you can go to between this area and before you get to Puerto Vallarta, it's kind of a long stretch. I'm sorry, it's between Puerto Vallarta and Mazatlan. But there's a long stretch. There's not much between Mazatlan and Puerto Vallarta, but there is this tiny little island that you can go to, which is a dicey anchorage. It can support about 3 boats. And this rock, you'll see the island, but this rock is all that's between you and the sea. And so you can hide about 3 boats behind it. It's almost all rock on the bottom. There's like 3 patches of sand, and it took us 2 tries to find it. The first night, it was completely calm. We thought we were anchored. The anchor was really just laying on a slab of rock. I found out the next morning when I dove down on it to see. I said, this isn't going to work. And so we were able to tuck in next to it. We were so close to another boat, like feet away. And then we had 30-knot winds come through that night. And so it was a wild night, but the anchor, yeah, it is. But the reason that people go there is that it is just this incredible wildlife. There's so many whales in the area, and then the birding is really what people go there for. It's where the blue-footed boobies do all of their nesting, and along with egrets and a bunch of other birds. But it is, you get on the island and it feels like Jurassic Park. There are just thousands and thousands of birds, constant noise. These guys aren't happy when you're walking past their nests because they're right on the beach with all their little ones. And so we were there late enough that everybody had hatched and they were kind of getting to be kind of teenagers. And but it's a pretty special place to spend a couple of days. I wouldn't want to spend there too long because if the weather's bad, you want to get out of there. But if the weather's good, and we on the way down, we couldn't stay there because there's too many boats. So we were already like 3 or 4 boats, so there was nowhere for us to go. But on the way back, we got lucky and it was a little quieter. And so we could spend a couple of days checking all the wildlife out. So it's if you weren't
Frigate birds.
looking at the birds, you were watching the whales out behind you. So it's just kind of a magical little location. But once we got back up to Mazatlan, then well, basically I kind of jumped a couple of things. We spent a little time in Puerto Vallarta, went back to the US in March to renew our visas and pick up some more boat parts, because there's always more boat parts that you don't need, but you want. And so you have access to Amazon again or some marine store. And so we could do that. But then we got ourselves back up to Mazatlan, and then you have to decide when you're going to jump back across the sea and start working up the Baja side for the summer. And so that was, again, a pretty nice, easy crossing from Mazatlan across. We went kind of by ourselves, and then it turned out that there was another boat about 10 miles behind us, and we became good friends with them once we got across. But it was a fun trip across, non-eventful again. And the goal for us, we were trying to catch up with Mark Dix before he went back to Seattle. And so it turned out that we got there within 2 days of he and Elka heading back to Seattle. And so they're a little ways from La Paz, and it was going to be complicated for him to meet us in La Paz. And so we said, well, there's probably no reason we can't just anchor out in front of his house. And so we just anchored up in front of his house, so Mark could see us coming on our tracker. And so he was out there in his kayak and met us and pointed us to where to park. And we parked the boat, launched the dinghy, and had a nice dinner with he and Elka. And so he's got a beautiful place. I can see why they keep going back. Anybody that's been there understand it's. She didn't. The timing for us was tight. That they had to leave in a couple of days. Elka she just had dental surgery, and then they had a car issue. But we just walked down the beach to a nice restaurant and had a nice meal together. And this is their view. This is from their balcony looking back at our boat. And we were there at the time of year where the wind is settled down, but normally Mark's out there with his kite, out there. Yeah, all day, every day, in pretty special place. So we spent a night there, and then we pushed on working our way towards La Paz. And just before you get to La Paz, there's a number of little anchorages, and this was a really nice one. It's just this classic little horseshoe shaped, the bluest water we had ever seen. The water was so clear. It was the first time that we could see 20 feet down without. You could easily see exactly where you dropped your anchor, and it was completely protected. The challenge with La Paz, especially the time of year that we were there, is normally in most places the wind comes down at night. Well, in La Paz, that's when the wind picks up. And so you want to be somewhere where you're comfortable that you can actually get some sleep, because the wind is coming. And this place was protected on all sides pretty much. And so we didn't really see much wind. And it was comfortable for us to spend a couple of days there waiting for friends to catch up again, so that then we could meet them in La Paz. We got into La Paz and spent a couple of nights out in the channel. And they talk about, was it the La Paz Waltz? I think they talk about it as the tide goes in and out, the boats shift back and forth. And then at night, the wind picks up. It's really shallow and it's good mud, so the anchors stick, but it still isn't that comfortable. And so we were able to get into this sort of a virtual marina. It just has this big floating dock that goes around. We were able to get in there. There were no utilities or anything, but we didn't need them. And so once we got in there, then we figured we could spend more time on land and not have to think about the boat. And so we got in there and were able to hang out for a while and enjoy La Paz. It's a cool sailing town. Lots and lots of boats, very organized cruiser system. They have meetings every day. You can go up and meet at the cruiser club every day for coffee and get caught up with everything. Pretty good marine supply stores if you need that kind of thing. And it turned out that right when we were there, word started spreading that Starlink had turned on roaming, which meant that then you could use it on your sailboat. And then we found out that you didn't actually, the home address didn't really matter anymore because you could roam. And so I got on Starlink's website, and they show a map where they were available. And so I picked some random address about 50 miles north of La Paz is the home address, and then had the marina is the shipping address. In Seattle is our billing address, and they didn't really care. And the dish got there in like 3 days. And so internet access is a challenge out there. I mean, the cell phone service is usually non-existent if you're away from town, and you're always away from a town. And a lot of us were still trying to run a business. And so it was always annoying. We were spending lots of money for crappy internet over cell. And suddenly everybody went from no internet to having 200 megabit internet all the time, anywhere. And so quite a novelty, and it just worked. I mean, we went from just watching, we have lots and lots of movies to watch, but suddenly we turn on all of our streaming, and we were watching Netflix 6 hours a day, and got up six, but we got caught up with all of our YouTube channels. It was sort of ridiculous how much streaming we were watching just because of the novelty of being able to stream again. And it worked pretty well underway, and it
Actually worked really well underway,
yeah,
surprisingly. I mean, we were in some really remote areas after this,
some pretty
and
rough stuff.
and it was great. I mean,
Pretty amazing stuff. I mean, it was the irony. It does have a gimbal, yeah. So it'll track. It doesn't really need to. In fact, some people have kind of turned off the gimbal motor. They just point it straight up, because if you turn the boat real fast, if it doesn't track fast enough, then you can lose signal for a little bit. And if you're in the middle of a good Netflix show, you don't want to get annoyed by that. And so a lot of people they would just get it pointed straight up, and then just unplug the motor, the servo motor that would make a gimbal. But
You're watching Netflix and you're turning the boat real fast.
yeah. Well, I mean, you got to turn. We had to change tack, and so you got to turn, and so that can screw things up. But so it's kind of a nice game changer. It was so funny, from everybody complaining about no internet, and then like everybody and their brother you'd see the UPS truck show up, and they would pull out 6 or 8 Starlink boxes out of them, and everybody would be wiping the drool off their mouth, trying to figure out, if is this one mine, is this one mine? And so it was nice to pretty much plug and play. And so that was cool for us. The bigger thing for us was getting access to weather. I mean, weather was never really scary, but you'd like to go out, you'd like to get the best weather report you can get. And so with this, you could always get weather. Suddenly you had cell phone, you could do cell phone over Wi-Fi. And so suddenly you had cell phone service anywhere. And so you didn't have to worry about being within VHF range of somebody. You could just give them a call, or if there was somebody, there was 2 anchorages ahead of you, you could call them on the phone to see, is a room for me up there? And so that was really nice, because there was a lot of boats going at the same time, and the anchorages were getting full. And so they'd say, there's 3 of us leaving tomorrow. And so then you could head up there tomorrow. And so that became super convenient. We're taking all the sailor stuff out of sailing, but it made life nice and safe and comfortable with everybody.
Sonata, we buddy boated with another boat called Basic, and they're also from Seattle. They're a catamaran.
They came to a couple of meetings.
Yeah, and they came to a couple meetings, and so we buddy boated with them most of this trip, basically, through here. So and that was a game changer for them, because they have a YouTube channel. And so that was a real game changer for them to get the Starlink satellite dish. Really helped them be able to continue their journey and be able to be in more remote areas and still be able to get videos out. So that was a big deal. Oh, yes.
They're doing
Yes, they
well.
are.
Yeah.
Doing
They're
quite
not a big channel, but they're doing well. Yeah.
They have
Yeah,
a
daughter.
little dog named Compass. It's a little forgot what kind of dog it is now, but anyway, Yorkshire Terrier, and the daughter that's just turned probably 13, 14. Like, while we were on the journey, we got to be with her for a couple of birthdays, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, so it was nice for them. And then after we got a Starlink, everybody got their Starlink, then everybody started heading further north into some really beautiful anchorages.
Before we leave. the
Yeah.
call, did you see Matt and Tricia?
We didn't, we never connected. Yeah, we tried a few
tried to get in
times.
touch with them, and unfortunately, we were not able to.
Mark said they sold their boat.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I think they still have their condo in La Paz, but I guess they sold their boat. And so I think they're sort of stationary for now.
Yeah.
That's what it seems, at least for now. So, yeah, yeah. But there's some beautiful anchorages as you're working further north, and
How are the bees?
we only had one anchorage where there were bees, and we didn't stay there very long. The bees weren't aggressive, but man, it was amazing how they would swarm in the mornings. I mean, they were just looking for water, fresh water. But in fact, I didn't put them slides in there, but you could just see the deck was covered in bees for a while. Thankfully, we had already made mosquito netting when we were in Ensenada to enclose the cockpit, and so we could hide pretty well, and then just keep capturing them and putting them out, capturing and putting them out. Some places you could stay far enough offshore that they wouldn't find you, but there were a couple places that they
And
were
they-
pretty intense.
They're intense, but they weren't aggressive. So they were just looking for water and stuff. So,
And they were usually gone by 10 o'clock. Once the water evaporated off the deck, then they were gone.
so neither of us got stung or anything.
But some beautiful anchorages. You get into these really remote fishing villages, and people living a simple life and just kind of metal shacks going out there. It's a hard life, man. You see those guys go out on their boats at night, come back the next morning. I mean, we were there during the good time of year. I'm sure they're still out there when it's not a good time of year to be out there. And so pretty tough life, but everybody seems happy and having a good time, just living sort of off the grid. There was actually, some of them actually would have there was one town that had their own little desalination plant, which was kind of cool. They'd gotten some kind of government grant at some point, but people live in a simple, happy life. I mean, we're sort of doing the same thing, so we could relate. One of the areas we were at, they actually had these salt farms where they would flood them and let the water evaporate out. And that was kind of an interesting thing. We'd heard about them, but had never actually seen one. But you see some burros wandering around in the scrubby trees. I felt bad for them. There wasn't much to eat and there wasn't much to drink, but they managed. And the cactus kept getting bigger and bigger. So the Baja side, that's pretty dry stuff. You know, we didn't really talk about it, but we were on the mainland side. It was pretty lush. But boy, once you get across, the humidity dropped and things got pretty dry. But some pretty classic anchorages. Aqua Verde is a pretty cool anchorage. There are all these beautiful, pretty nicely protected areas with some good hiking. This one in particular, it's kind of a long hike, but you go up onto the mountain that's sort of in the distance where there's caves with hieroglyphs on them. And so the crazy thing about this one was you're hiking through the desert and suddenly you're walking through a swamp, and there were just some underwater pools that would bubble up, and a skeleton turtle that we don't know how long he's been there, but been there for a while, still fully intact. So you end up kind of walking around up over a hill and then back down the beach, and then start hiking your way back up, trying to get up to this cave. And it's you want to start early because it's hot and bring a fair amount of water, but it's the payoff once you get up in the cave is pretty good. We're sort of looking across the big bay, back to it's still the Baja Peninsula, but the water line kind of heads way to the west, I guess, and then kind of juts back out to the east. And so we're looking pretty much north, I guess, from this view. And I don't know if there was somebody up there that just had paint on their hands a week ago, but they claim that these have been here for a long time, the handprints and other things, but it was a nice hike with a good view. You could see how people would be able to hang out there. There was enough room that you could have a family hanging out there for quite a while if they needed to. And then we were sort of working our way up to Loreto at that point, which is another pretty nice town. We didn't really spend much time there other than just to get groceries, because it was some beautiful anchorages nearby where we would just go in once a week and get groceries and then head back out to the islands again. This Isla Coronados was just it's a beautiful classic horseshoe shaped, it's a small island with a volcano, it's a volcanic island, but it's just a beautiful anchorage. The water is really clear, a lot of fish.
You're probably there in total almost 3 weeks at least.
You get to some of these places and there just isn't a reason to leave. And so you just don't. You have to find a reason to leave, whether it's your visa is going to expire or the weather's changing, but otherwise you get up in the morning, say, when are you gonna leave? I don't know. And that's always the best answer is if there's not a reason to, then we don't. So nice hike with a nice view once you get up the top of this old volcano.
You see the hand?
Yeah.
So that's where we're anchored, right down in there. In this area here.
Beautiful boat. There was a big giant cruiser that came through there with a helicopter on it, and they kept flying back and forth to Laredo, either to, I don't know, pick up wine or pick up friends or something, but you did see the helicopter coming and going. I think,
White ball.
yeah, with big deck on the back.
We were in Korea.
Oh, is
Yeah.
that right?
Yeah. And then there's a bigger island, this Isla Carmen, that's actually, we ran into bees in one of the anchorages in Isla Carmen, but there's a little place called V Cove, and it's called V Cove because it's shaped like a V from above, and it's pretty tight, and it's a little bit challenging. The water is pretty deep until you get in pretty close, so you can't put many boats in there, but it's a pretty breathtaking place with these big cliffs and these amazing caves that you can take your dinghy into. I mean, you could, if you didn't have a mast on the boat, we probably could have taken our boat into some of these caves. Were pretty big, and the water was so blue and so clear. Pretty nice area. And then we headed further north up into Baja Concepcion, which is this pretty deep bay that goes up there. And we kind of got up there probably later than we should have because it was starting to get hot. And the water temperature was going up. The water, it's not really trapped in this bay because it's a big bay. It goes back like 20 miles, but it's not going in and out a lot, and it's fairly shallow. And so once we got in there, then the water temperature, the sea temperature, you see there was 95.36. Air temperature was 89, and then in the boat, it was usually above 100. And so it was a really interesting experience to just try and absorb the heat and see how your body dealt with it. It was incredible. We were using a lot of power because we were constantly making water because we were just drinking water nonstop. And the poor water cooled refrigerator was not happy. So it was running 24/7. And so we just went to bed sweating, got up sweating, sweated all day. But the bottom of the boat has never been cleaner. We spent a lot of time in the water scrubbing the bottom of the boat. So it had never looked so good when we were in there. But there's some beautiful anchorages. I mean, you can see why people hang out there because there's some beautiful anchorages and really classic, nice conditions most of the time. Glassy water, really clear. We had an elephant seal pull up on the beach. There's all these little shacks where they camp in there, and this elephant seal showed up, and everybody kept gathering around until it decided it wanted to be in the shade and went right up next to one of these little shacks. And it was a shack that was full of a family of about 10, and
People scattered.
they were moving quickly because once that thing starts moving, it's as big as a truck. There were little goats that would wander up and down on the cliffside. But beautiful, just classic, desert stuff. It was beautiful water, nice conditions, pretty good fishing, really good spear fishing. We didn't play around with that, but you could get in around the rocks and around some of these, and guys had pretty good luck. But then it was time, we needed to go back and spend some time with Patty's parents. And so we shot back across. It was about an 83 nautical mile trip, I think, from this bay kind of straight across to the mainland to Guaymas, which is another little kind of port town. They have a nice dry dock. They had a good boat yard, and they had a lift that could accommodate multi-hulls. And so we shot across there, and Patty said we had one harrowing night where we it's got to be the start of the season when you start the squall started to come through, and we hadn't seen rain at all, and suddenly we had lots of rain and 45 knots of wind, and this tiny little anchorage, which was so cute when we got there, and then it seemed really small once the wind picked up and the waves started picking up. And so
Fortunately, we had taken all the mosquito netting off and put the regular strata-glass back up. And it's a good thing we did, because, I mean, it poured
it was,
rain. I
it was-
mean, we would have been,
it
the
was,
boat would have been really wet inside.
it was good practice for when we head further south than when we get into this on a regular basis. But it was, the boat behaved itself, and it only lasted about 3 hours, and I just kept telling Patty, no, lightning won't hit our boat. No, lightning won't hit our boat. No, lightning won't hit our boat. Because we didn't have a lot of choice. But Guaymas is a interesting place. I mean, like, well, we're anchored here is only 3 feet deep, 3.5 feet. Well, depending on the tide, it would get down to 3 feet and then go back up a little bit. But they had a big lift. They basically had a big commercial boat yard next to the sailboat yard, and so they had a lift that could get us out and put us away. So we're kind of tucked in nicely with some other boats, and need to get back and take a look at it. But it seemed pretty happy, and the guy that runs the place occasionally sends us pictures, and so at least on the outside it's happy. I'm kind of curious to see what it looks like on the inside. But we came back to Seattle in kind of mid-July.
23rd.
Okay, late July, and got to enjoy a spectacular summer in Seattle, and now get to see everything get watered a bit. So that's it. That's I guess 13 months from the time we left San Francisco to the time we pulled the boat out of the water, and it was a good experience. They say that the people are really what makes it, and that cruiser community is really a nice community. We made so many great friends and had such a good time with them. Boredom is never a thing. You would think you spend the same 3 weeks and looking at the same water, but there's always enough going on. Lots of impromptu dinners, and come over and have a beer. There's somebody's birthday, so we're gonna have a party on the beach. And so all that was nice. I mean, you can see how people want to hang out in the Sea of Cortez. When we were building our boat, people would come in to the boatyard and talk about this vortex in the Sea of Cortez, that people with aspirations to want to sail around the world, they would never leave. And we ran into quite a few of those people that they'd been there for 5 years, 10 years, just didn't have a reason to do anything different. It's easy to kind of move around. If you want to put the boat away, you can go to Puerto Vallarta or go to Mazatlan, or go further north up into the sea like we did. You can even go much further up in the north and pull the boat out if you need to work on it. And so it's a pretty comfortable life. A lot of Canadians that are doing the 6-month thing, and a lot of Americans doing the 6-month thing, and you can see the attraction. I mean, I would recommend it. We are enjoying it full time, but it was fun to hear how people would be on it for 6 months, then go back and do some kind of a 6-month gig, and then be back to do it all over again.
Visa wise are limited to be there 6 months.
6 months at a time, yeah. And it kind of works out. It kind of worked out okay, just where you were geographically at. That it was an easy place to jump back, and we didn't really have. We wouldn't have had to pick up too much of this time, so it could have been a pretty quick trip there and back if we weren't doing other things. But the first time back, we really didn't know what we needed on the boat, and so after the first 6 months, there were not big things, but just lots of little things that were going to make life easier. So we brought back. Patty's parents thought we were nuts. The Amazon delivery guy knew them on a first name basis, because 2 weeks prior to us getting back, it was daily deliveries. And you just can keep hitting that buy now, buy now, buy now. And so lots and lots of little things.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we would have liked to have shown a lot more places that we stopped along the way, but it would have taken hours and hours to
Yeah.
show everything that we did. But
You'd had to bring a sleeping bag.
but it was amazing. I mean, we got to some really quaint and really lovely little places that are just tucked away, and just amazing.
People were nice. I mean, the Mexican people are super. We had
nice.
never been there before, which is kind of amazing. We'd never been to Mexico, but
And
they had
never-
no reason to be nice to us, but they all were.
Yeah.
And
A little, but not enough to really, I mean, just a little bit to get by. The The sad thing, and whether this is good or bad, is that because we were around, most of the cruisers that we were around were Americans. You spoke English most of the time, and you just needed a little bit of rudimentary Spanish to get by, like when you went to go to the store to buy a few things and this and that and the other. So you didn't really need a lot of Spanish, very much.
It was really easy to be a lazy American because, yeah, I mean, really, I
We
mean,
were.
part of it was COVID, but part of it was we would only touch land where there was civilization just to buy groceries, and groceries are not a lot of conversation needs to be had for groceries. You pick it up, you go up to the register and they turn the screen around so you can see how much it is in pesos, and you hand them the pesos and you head out. And so, yeah, I mean, it would have been great to have deeper conversation with some of these fishermen because they look like they have really interesting lives, but I mean, we didn't want to impose on them either. I mean, they're dealing with these lousy cruisers taking their anchorages all the time. And so, but it would be nice to be able to have a deeper conversation because they look like really interesting people. And some of the more touristy areas, you probably could have more fun talking with them, but they're kind of used to it. But yeah, we were able to get away with the bare basics. And I mostly was using Google Translate to translate menus until I figured out what prawns was in Spanish and what fish is in Spanish. And so, but Google Translate worked pretty good for that.
Yeah, you could get by with just Google Translate actually a lot of the time. Like if you got in a cab and you needed to tell them where you were going, you could just basically do it on the Google Translate and then just show it to them. And they were like, oh, okay. They totally get it, know where you're going, needed to go. And so, yeah, it was pretty good.
They have Uber and Didi, and so even those times you just get in the cab and they knew where you were going to go, and so it was surprisingly easy and efficient. And everything is sort of kind of half price as far as food goes. I mean, what was fun is the grocery shopping. We didn't really show any of I never took any pictures of the grocery stores, but I mean, sometimes there was just somebody's living room in a small fishing village, but you could always get eggs and you could always get fish and usually prawns and some basic vegetables. And so we never ate as well as we did on the boat. And it was, I mean, if you want Twinkies 3 times a day or Fritos or something, you're in trouble. But if you're happy with the basics, tostadas and fresh vegetables and fresh fish, and we ate so well.
Very healthy, really.
And if we got into a big town, you could really stock up. Like you get into Mazatlan or Puerto Vallarta or something, there would be a Costco or a Walmart. And you could get all the staples, so you could really load up the bilge. And we don't drink very much, but we found out how much other people do drink when they would have their separate Costco shopping cart just for the booze. And
What's funny is that I would buy a fair amount of alcohol, and so there's actually still quite a bit of alcohol on the boat, but actually ended up giving a lot of it away because we just don't drink.
So it ended up that for parties, we could always bring alcohol. And so then
Yeah,
it was good because
Which was good.
people would start to run out of wine or tequila or something. And so we always had unopened bottles on the boat. We still do. And so that was always an easy thing to bring along, and they were always happy to receive it. So, but I would recommend it if you can figure out a way. It's nice. I mean, whether you did it full time or 6 months or whatever, or even just for, I mean, we barely scratched the surface, and we were told that, we only hit 10% of the anchorages, but we got enough that we understand what it's about, and you could certainly do a few more laps and certainly not get bored with it. So, but the weather is so perfect in that time of year that it's nice.
So you're planning on doing it?
We're still trying to figure it out. I think we may go further south. We're thinking about maybe heading down to Panama to just keep going further south this year once we get back to the boat. And it was fun when we were in Puerto Vallarta in kind of, I guess, March time frame. That's where a lot of the boats were staging to go across the Pacific. So it's fun to be around those guys. Some of them had done it a couple of times, and some people it was their first time. And so it was fun to spend some time around them and see what that looks like. And then you could follow them on their tracker, and they make it look pretty easy. But so that was something we would like to do, but I think it's still a little ways away. I think it's a little bit crowded right now because of COVID, and I don't know what's going to happen with this season with COVID, but there were a lot of boats that went across last year, and I think there's going to be even more boats that want to cross this year. And so I think it's going to be a little bit busy over there. And we're with family stuff going on, I think we want to stay a little bit closer to this hemisphere for a little while. And so there's still plenty of fun things we can do in this hemisphere. And so we base head south, maybe go through the Panama Canal, spend a couple of years in the Caribbean and then figure it out from there. So, but we definitely still looking forward to being on the boat.
Carrier boats in there, 4731.
Not much. I mean, it was mostly just cruising boats. I think in Puerto Vallarta, we bumped into one or two. Because I mean, Banderas Bay, if you're a sailor, a real sailor, every day they got perfect wind. And so it's a great place to sail. You can go out there and at 2 o'clock, you're gonna have 15 to 20 knots of wind at the same angle, and it's pretty flat water. And so if you're a real sailor, you could have a great time. And so, I mean, it would be a great place to have a boat like that. I think you could really just go out there and scream around and not get into too much trouble and do it every day.
What's funny though is it wasn't until we got to Banderas Bay is when we saw the most trimarans that we'd seen. Before that, we hadn't really run into hardly any. And then when we got to Banderas Bay, all of a sudden we started running into like multiple different people that were on trimarans.
Where all those home-built trimarans go are in Mazatlan. Mazatlan, they use them as tour boats, and they're like the marina we were at, there were probably 15 trimarans of different vintages. And
But they're not really sailing vessels anymore. I mean, they're just
it's
sort
just
of a
big
party
wide
boat.
platform. It's cheaper to buy than a catamaran, and it's just got a big wide platform. And so some of these had these amazing, they would just build a deck from one outer hull to the other outer hull across, and big rails and stuff. But it still didn't take much of a motor to push them around. They still had a sail that they could put up just for looks for the most part.
Yeah.
But they were just a great platform, and I'm sure they could get them cheap. Catamarans, there's no such thing as a cheap, inexpensive catamaran. And so these older trimarans, you could understand the appeal. They would deck them out just so they could put 20 people on them in a big stereo system, and they take them out and wander around the bay and then back in. And so there are plenty of trimarans, and there was actually some really nice trimarans. I mean, there was some really nice, some big, nice fiberglass horsemen's and things that, still look like they had a lot of life in them. And, but they were getting a lot of usage as a party boat. But we saw some nice, when we got down by Puerto Vallarta, we did start to run into a few more trimarans. There was an older couple, I can't remember the name of their boat or their names, but they were on their, I think, third lap around the planet on their boat. And they headed out. They were actually docked next to us in Puerto Vallarta, and they headed out across Pacific about the same time we were heading back north. And a few others. There was some ran across a few nice ones, not many, but a few. A lot of catamarans. For obvious reasons, catamarans are sort of taken over, and so it's a lot of people on big catamarans, small catamarans. And the fun thing for me was, particularly this kind of coastal cruising, is it really didn't matter if you had a fast boat or a slow boat. If you're only going 30 miles, you might get to the anchorage an hour before they do, but it really didn't make a lot of difference. I mean, for us, we loved the trimaran is just such a comfortable flat. I mean, at anchor, it's so nice, to have that big platform, and we don't have to worry about getting rocked around like they were doing on the monohulls at times. But in general, it was fun that nobody really cared that much about how expensive their boat was or how big their boat was. It was mostly if they were nice people. And I mean, it turned out that if you had a catamaran, there was more likely you were going to have parties on your boat if you couldn't have a party on the beach, just because you had more real estate.
Right.
But everybody, yeah, it was less of a thing. I mean, everybody would ask about trimarans. Usually I would, particularly if we were on monohull people, I would just say it's a monohull with training wheels, and that would kind of diffuse the situation. Everybody assumes the boat's really fast, and I would never say the boat's fast. I said it's just not slow, because the boat's not supposed to be super fast, and we have it certainly overloaded. But most of the time, if there was wind anywhere near the beam, we were between 8 and 10 knots. And if we were going faster than that, we usually started slowing the boat down because we just didn't need to. If we start to jump over things, we didn't need to. And so we were just getting good at going downwind. We were getting more comfortable with the spinnaker. And the nice thing was that, like our hope was it was really great in light winds. If you're going 7 knots and 8 knots of wind, in fact, we would have some of our other friends, they would see us on AIS and they would say, if you have your motor on, because it would only be 8 knots of wind or 10 knots of wind, and we were going 7 or 8 knots. And you have your engine on? Because we would be catching up with them or getting further away from them. And so certain points of sail going upwind, we weren't that dramatically fast, but you just, if you're sailing right, you're not going upwind. And so in that part of the world, so it was mostly, if it was anywhere near our beam, we were fast. And if we were going downwind, I mean, it's hard to go fast downwind if there's not a lot of wind because you're running away from the wind. But we didn't have to run the engine nearly as much or nearly as hard. I mean, I felt bad for people with big monohulls. If there wasn't a wind, they were burning a lot of fuel. And it was nice that we were just sipping fuel. So we would usually put the engine at between 1,800 and 2,200, and we were burning a quarter to a third of a gallon an hour. And so we just didn't have to carry that much fuel and spend that much on fuel. So that was nice.
What was the diesel prices?
They were actually pretty good. We didn't really see much changes in price. I mean, it was typically $4 a gallon. It was always like about $1 a liter, it seemed like. And so, but we didn't have to buy very much. I mean, the one thing that I learned as a cruising sailor in my limited experience is sailboats are really sail assisted boats. It was pretty rare that people didn't have their engine on motor sailing. I mean, most of it was because of the time of year that we were there. There's just not a lot of wind. It's sort of like in the Northwest. And if you needed to get between A and B in the daylight, you sort of needed to maintain a certain speed. And so people had their engines on most of the time, but it was so nice when you could turn it off. Even if we weren't running the engine very hard, it was always so nice. And as the year went on, and we got more wind, and we probably were just becoming better sailors, we used the engine less and less. I mean, the last 3 months, it was pretty rare that we would turn the engine on, and we had some really nice sailing. So the boat would sail well if we knew we were doing and there was wind. But
Especially with that code zero just rocks.
it's a weapon in the
really
right
good.
wind conditions. Yeah, because we have a pretty small head sail, and so that wouldn't pull us very hard. We have a nice big main relative to the size of the boat, but yeah, once we put that thing up, if the wind was apparent wind was between 60 and 120, it was happy. But if it got to 59, it was unhappy, and it got to 125, it was unhappy. So if you could manage to point in that direction, the right direction to keep it happy, then we scooted right along. So that was nice. Yeah, sailing is nice. You have to respect the Sea of Cortez and not go out there at the wrong time, but otherwise, you're there at the right time of year and you wait for the right weather windows. It's super comfortable. And everybody told us, don't sail on a schedule. And if you don't sail on a schedule, you can pick the time you want to go out. It's pretty comfortable. Even getting down south of San Francisco, if you pick your weather windows right, that was not scary for rookie sailors. We never were out anything that was scary. I mean, coming out of Monterey Bay, getting around the corner, it was pretty choppy, but the boat didn't really care. And we just got around the corner and then got the boat pointed in the right direction. And yeah, getting around Point Conception, we didn't get anything too nasty there. So far we've had pretty good luck. We had insurance until the hurricane season, and then we couldn't get insurance. So working on that. I would say I'm starting to work on it again now to see if we can get it again. It makes you feel uncomfortable. I know I can fix the boat, but I'd be nice to have it if something really bad happened.
You have to have insurance though.
Have to have liability insurance,
Liability insurance through Mexico, in Mexico.
which is really inexpensive, like $200 a year.
Yeah, it's not.
You didn't have any significant problems.
No, they don't even care what your boat is. You just need to have it. I mean, it's mostly, I think, for marinas. If you're crashing in other boats, then
Did you pick that up in the state?
we actually didn't even know about it until we'd been in Ensenada for several weeks, and then they said you did. They were surprised that the marina would let us in without it. But there's actually just a website. I think it's called Baja something, where you just go on their website and just apply for it, and they do it through a national carrier, big carrier, but it wasn't complicated at all. In fact, I just renewed it last week, I think. And so that the liability part is really easy. Some people were able to keep insurance through, but it's really hard, and it's really hard on a multi-hull. And it's really hard on a trimaran multi-hull. For a full-time cruiser, it was tricky to get insurance. We didn't really try that hard. I mean, we made it all the way to June. And I said, well, you know, if we kept working, maybe we could have found somebody, but we just didn't try that hard. We just let it go. And I mean, for me, the only thing that would really be bad is if we had a fire. I mean, I'm not worried about crashing into something and having to fix the boat. That kind of thing doesn't frighten me because we know how to do that. But if we had a fire or something that really burnt the thing up, that would be harder for me to repair. Yeah, exactly. So that's the only thing that scares me is fire. And putting a hole in the boat, that's annoying, but
I did that, by the way.
just a
I put a
small
hole, yeah, I put a small hole in the AMA
above the water line. So it was-
above the water. Ran into the dock. Yeah. Oops. Yeah. Yeah, so I've been the main navigator driver
and driver.
of the boat. So I'm pretty much dock it, get it out. I do all of the navigating as far as, I mean,
I
steering.
deal with the dock lines. Patty gets us to the dock. And she's got pretty good at it. Reverse is still a bit of a mystery. But forward is okay.
Because of the prop wash, it's still a little bit,
Prop walk is still a new thing, mostly because we just don't have a lot of practice, thankfully. I mean, we're always at anchor. I mean, the only time that we went into a marina was in Mazatlan and Puerto Vallarta, and then La Paz for a little bit, just because we were going to be there for a while. But otherwise, living at anchor most of the time is pretty good. Probably, they're probably not as big as like Mazatlan or Puerto Vallarta, but they're the most enthusiastic. Yeah. Club Cruceros, yep. Super friendly. I mean, there's lots of crusty old cruisers, you know, that they still either have a boat or they sold their boat and still live there. I mean, La Paz is a pretty attractive place. I didn't enjoy it that much just because of the wind at night. Yeah, it was annoying.
it was really windy through there.
It's okay if you were in a dock, but even then I mean, the wind just howls, at least the time of year that we were there. You know, it's blowing 30 at night. It's hard to sleep. And so it's nice. Most other places, the wind dies at night. Banderas Bay is kind of wicked during the day, but you know, it's going to stop as soon as the sun sets. The anchorage in La Cruz is nasty. I mean, you're guaranteed to have 30-knot winds going through a really busy anchorage, but it's got good holding. And although we did have boats anchors dragged past us a couple times, and that's uncomfortable. But you know, the wind's always going to die at night, and so then you can sleep well. And so, but-
Yeah, we've had that, I think 3 times we had a boat drag pretty close to us, right by us. No,
no, yeah. And that's the thing is that then you're not comfortable leaving your boat. And that's the problem. If it's going to be really windy, then you're not really comfortable getting off your boat for an extended period of time. So it limits how much time you can spend ashore. But all those remote anchorages, those are popular because they're good. They're tucked in the right directions. You know, if the wind's coming out of the north, the anchorages hide the wind from the north, and then when the wind switches, you go to anchorages where you can hide from the wind from the south. So there's enough anchorages that you can usually find a good one. The biggest challenge we had was things were getting crowded, especially in the spring. Everybody was heading north, and the anchorages were getting pretty busy.
Take advantage of your shallow ground.
Sometimes we could at least get up front. Yeah, we go, but most of the time it was beautiful. Like we almost always anchored in like between 8 and 15 feet of water, I guess. And usually nice sand, good holding. So it's really good cruising
Well,
grounds.
with that said though, we started dragging a little bit later with the anchor we had. So we're gonna actually replace that anchor and go with a heavier anchor.
We're just gonna go up one size. I think
Yeah.
it may be that we have a Mantis 2 anchor, which just doesn't seem to dig in as well. Like I could dive down and see what our anchor looked like relative to our neighbor's anchor. It just didn't seem to dig in as nicely. And so we're gonna do like every other cruiser does and put an oversized anchor on it and then sleep better night. We only had to drag twice, but that was twice too many. And, you know, you have your anchor alarm on your phones and you just don't want that thing to go off. And if it goes off, then you don't sleep well for the next week because you're worried that it's gonna happen again. And so, but in general, it's okay. Yeah, go with the original Mantis. I don't know what it is. You know, there was a boat we were with quite a bit. He would be right next to us, digging in the same sand, doing the same technique. And his boat, his anchor was always buried in beautifully and ours wasn't. And so I don't know if it was just because it was heavier or because this Mantis 2 is slightly different shape to the Mantis 1. And so don't know exactly why, but we're gonna
go up size. We're gonna keep the other anchor though for our stern anchor if we need it for stern anchor. So
Yeah, I mean, those mooring fields just can't put up. So
yeah.
yeah,
everybody wants to tuck in for.
yeah, yeah. Some of the anchorages you have to use a stern anchor because it's tight.
You know, that let's go.
Yeah, yeah.
Crocodiles were never a thing, at least where we were at.
It was more the temperature of the water for me. Like if the water was too cold, I just didn't want to get in it. But I mean, no, there was never any time that it was like not feeling safe to be in the water. Did
Although-
lots of snorkeling and lots of just getting in the water. Just
Some of those Dorados circling the boat while I was trying to scrub the bottom, I didn't like the way they were looking at me. You know, and then you got all these tiny little fish that are just, the little fish are just wandering around. You're like, get the hell away from me. 'Cause I don't want them to make a bad move because when those things hit, they hit so hard and so fast.
they
People didn't feel too bad about trying to catch them because they're like, you know, you are just a brutal predator, you know, so we're just further up the food chain, but you didn't have any empathy for them because they were just ruthless. I mean, when you see what's going on under the water, it's no different than being out in nature. I mean, nature is not kind. You're either eating somebody or getting eaten. It's amazing. But those little fish, they love to hide under the boats. Understand why. We would end up with them up inside of our centerboard trunk. We could
Yeah,
see
you
them
could see 'em
we
swimming
could see 'em
around in the
swimming around
centerboard
inside of
trunk.
Thank you guys so much.
Yeah.
I'm a Canadian, retired. And both my pension and my medical insurance require I not be out of Canada more than 6 months less a day. Also, my boat is my home. So how feasible is it to do a yearly trip to sail down and back within less than 6 months?
I wouldn't recommend it. There's quite a few people that they'll go back up to California, like to San Diego, but just getting from Cabo San Lucas up to San Diego they call going uphill, it just doesn't look pleasant. I mean, it's just a lot of motor. You're always going against the wind and against the waves. And so it just doesn't look like fun. Getting all the way back up to Canada would be, everybody we know that has done that part of the coast, they don't want to do it unless they have to. So I mean, what almost all the Canadians seem to do is, because it's not their home, or if it is their home, they're doing something else, that they usually put their boat in Puerto Vallarta or Mazatlan and just leave it there and then come back. And they're in an RV or something else for the rest of for the summer season. And so, yeah, I wish it was feasible, but it would be tough. Going back uphill is tough. Even to get to San Diego is tough. I mean, we've heard a lot of harrowing stories just to get that far, let alone it only gets tougher from San Diego.
I've also heard though people that have going out to Hawaii and then back in to
Yep,
use the
yeah, for
prevailing
sure.
winds.
Yep, no, for sure. Yeah, I mean, if you really want to do some real sailing, it'd probably be pretty spectacular.
Yeah, because other than sleeping in my van and missing the sailing season up here, which is pretty nice,
Yeah,
and
That's-
basically being homeless, I have to leave my home down there.
yeah,
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 Yeah.
that's the reality, is that a lot of people, I think, leave their boats down there for, in a marina or on the hard. In a
right.
marina for 6 months, and then they come back to it and launch it and sail around for 6 months.
if you have a lot of money, you can put it on a ship and bring it back up. You know,
Let's
they'll
get
bring it back up to
to-
Vancouver, but
Two boats in that respect.
Right.
You either have money or you have time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if
So-
both are restricted, then it's a problem.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's true.
So this is Vaughn Taylor. I love the presentation. I followed you along on Instagram and really just enjoyed seeing the adventures and being you being up in the ropes. It looks like a lot of fun. So Joel, you mentioned running a business part-time. Are you just kind of doing that part-time, or did you feel that you had to be connected on a daily basis?
I was usually connected on a daily basis if I could, but I'm really only working a few hours a day. Just I've got a pretty simple business that other people are doing the day-to-day stuff, but it's nice to be connected if I can, just so that I feel like I'm still engaged with the company.
but with the Starlink, that was a game changer. The Starlink really made it possible for us to be anywhere, in remote areas and be able to still be connected with the business and keep everything running smoothly.
Yeah, that's pretty fantastic. I saw that they just launched the marine version of that, which was something like $10,000 a month or something crazy. You haven't had any issues with them restricting your usage though, being along the shore.
Yeah, no, the only challenge is I guess that you have to be like within, at least in the beginning, you had to be within like 12 miles of shore. And
Yeah.
so, like, I think we did lose when we were crossing the Sea of Cortez. The one time that we had it, it did stop working while we were in the middle of the Sea of Cortez. And so, but in Mexico, I mean, if you're in Mexico, it's great. Going further south, then you're still kind of going country to country to see who has it. And so we're hoping we're dragging our feet enough that then most countries will have it by the time we get there. But Mexico was great.
Yeah, that sounds great. Hey, just one other quick question. I saw it on your map. It looked like you were just hugging the coast on the way down. Were you really that close to the coast? Or did you go out? I hear most people kind of go out 30, 100 miles or so, but
No, I don't think so. I mean, we almost always were within sight of land unless the land went way, kind of had a big bay going in, and so we wouldn't waste any, but once you're more than a few miles out, I don't think there's a lot of reason to go out further. I don't think the wind is significantly any different. When people are coming down the California coast, some of them would go out further, or going from, like San Diego down to Cabo. If you wanted to do it in one shot, sometimes there's advantages to going further out, but pretty much everybody we were with, we could pretty much always see land unless we were actually crossing the Sea of Cortez. There just wasn't a reason to get any further out. You're kind of wasting distance. The wind was pretty much the same and the sea state was pretty much the same once you were, a mile or two offshore.
very cool. Thank you.
What about trying to avoid? Is that a reason to go further out?
You'd have to go pretty far out, I think. Yeah. Yeah, I think you'd have to go.
We were like 6 miles offshore between Seattle and San Francisco, and we did that to avoid fishing boats.
Yeah.
It was so rough. But anyway.
Yeah, I mean, you didn't want to be hugging the land, and it was, you would sort of know the areas where they were going to be at. Although there were some areas where, yeah, they're just kind of out there. But it was only a problem a few times.
It's another good reason though to have the radar. That really was a game changer for us too, because we had that on, at night. And so anything that was even just a small boat would show up.
It did a
on
pretty good
there.
job picking it up.
Did really good.
AIS was great for commercial traffic or other pleasure boats, but fishing boats never use their AIS. They don't want anybody to know where they're at, so they never turn it on.
Really need the satellite. I mean the radar.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's super helpful at night.
So your route, or did you use the electric? outboard?
No, we had a little 9.8, partly because we didn't know what the distances would be and how much extra electricity we would have. But we also sort of use it as a backup engine. I mean, the 9.8 would push the boat. I mean, that's what Bill always used to push his boat around. He just tie his dinghy to the boat and push it around. And so we sort of had it as, it was bigger than it needed to be, but we sort of kept it as a sort of a backup engine for the entire boat. If we lost the diesel, we knew we could still have decent maneuverability if we just used our dinghy, just launch the dinghy and use that. Yeah, I mean, the dinghy engine didn't use much in the diesel engine. I mean, we have a 27-gallon diesel fuel tank, and then we usually had like 3 jerry cans full. I mean, we never needed them, but we just always had it, so.
I think we're ready to wrap this up. Thanks, everybody who's also maybe not on the Pacific Standard Time for hanging in there and joining us.
Well, thank you. Enjoyed it.
Great.